policy program. And so in that capacity, I oversee a program of about 300 students that are studying both policy and environmental science as it relates to that. So we have 11 different concentrations, and students can focus on policy, they can focus on science. But related to that, I teach a course called Lawns in the Landscape, Environmental Hero or Villain. So just to give you an idea, in this class, we cover all aspects of how the lawn contributes to the environment, positively and negatively. So we look at how lawns affect global warming, regional air pollution, water quality, pesticide exposure, consumptive water use, biological diversity. And then we also look at the demographic and socioeconomic factors that can serve as predictors of people's behaviors about lawns, both how they perceive the aesthetic desires of a lawn and how they might manage that lawn. And then we also look at the different policies that are being implemented across the country to change lawn management behaviors or to reduce the amount of acres that's in lawns within a particular community. So the class is very environmentally oriented. It's not a traditional turfgrass management class. And I think it's the only one in the country that deals with policy issues that's taught every year. So just to give you a little background about where I come from in the area. I'm one that teaches the class from the perspective. I don't come with an agenda. As a turfgrass scientist, I let the data speak for itself. And so sometimes it looks good and sometimes it doesn't look so good. And so I think the students in the class, their eyes are opened to some things, and in other things, it just reconfirms what they've always thought about lawns. So what I'm going to do in the next couple minutes is I want to give you an overview, or I'm going to start with the assumption that somebody wants to have a lawn, but they want to do it in an environmentally favorable way. And so if somebody asked me, what are the 3 things I can do to make sure that I'm not using many resources on my lawn and increasing the chance for the pesticides or nutrients to move off into water? What can I do? And so I'm going to give you some of that in the next couple minutes. But it all kind of starts with a resiliency diagram here, which I captioned as Turfgrass Health Pyramid. And so if you want to reduce inputs into turfgrass and still have it be aesthetically pleasing, whatever that is for you, it really starts with the proper site conditions, selecting the right turfgrass species and varieties, and then implementing the right cultural practices. And if you can do these 3 things and do them right, then the need for inputs in a turfgrass system is dramatically reduced. So the need for fertilizers is somewhat reduced. The need for pesticides is dramatically reduced. And so that's the whole part. Start with the site, look at the site, evaluate whether it's a site that's really good for turfgrass. If it's not, then maybe do some corrective action before you establish the turfgrass. And so I'm going to give you one particular situation that deals with new residential developments. And this is a case where, when most residential developments are built, the builder, all they're really interested in doing is getting the bond released on the house. They just want to hand the keys off and then walk away from the development, walk away from the house. Of course, they'll come back and take care of things in the interim if something goes wrong. But as part of the requirement of building new residential neighborhood, there's a requirement that the soil has to be stabilized before the bond is released on the house. And so what's the cheapest way to do that? For most of the developers, it's to put turfgrass in. And so most homeowners, they're not even going to worry about the yard until year 2 of moving in. And so by that point, the builder's, she's moving out of the picture. And then at that point, you start to see the yard get tailored to what the individual wants. But they start usually with a pallet of turfgrass because it's the cheapest thing for the builder to put in. So what you typically find in a lot of new residential developments is the soil is not the soil on the left here, which is a grassland soil. They're highly productive. Grasses are actually really good at improving soil fertility over time. They're one of the best plant communities to do that. And that's why when you go to Iowa or you go to Illinois or you go out in the Midwest, you'll find that some of the most productive soils in the country were native grassland soils. But that's not the situation where grasses get established in residential neighborhoods. It's in areas where we have compacted soils, inverted soils. They're extremely infertile. And so how does a homeowner typically deal with that type of situation? Well, if they have a lawn and they want it to look, halfway decent in terms of being green and providing full cover, having functional capabilities, they need to put inputs into that because you have an infertile soil condition. And so for most residential developments, what I typically recommend is, first of all, do a soil test, see how compact the soil is. And if it's compact, that's probably a good indicator that you have subsoil sitting on the surface where the basement now is. It's now your topsoil. And so the best thing that you can do in order to minimize inputs going forward is, before you even start working on that lawn, is to go back and amend the soil with a lot of organic matter. If you can do that, you're going to dramatically reduce the inputs into the lawn. And so we say about 6 cubic yards per 1,000 square feet. That's a lot of compost. That's 2 inches. And rototill it into the soil. And if you do that, then your need for fertilizer is dramatically reduced. Irrigation, what I should have included in here is to show you a picture of what the lawn looks like here 4 years later, just doing this and nothing else, never irrigating, never fertilizing, never doing any weed control. It looks really nice. Okay, so the base is take care of your soil first, and then look at your site and see if it's really one that's, what are you going to do with that site? Is it going to be a site where you're going to have people playing on it all the time, or is it just going to be something to look at? Does it have a lot of shade? You look at those things, and they're going to pretty much tell you what type of turfgrass that you should put at that site, what type of turfgrass species. So that's going to be a function of your site conditions, what the intended use is, and then how it may potentially be managed. If somebody doesn't want to mow a lawn, they don't want to really do anything other than just have a clean area in front of them, that's one they don't have to maintain much, well, then there's a particular turfgrass species you would use for that, versus one that looks, really aesthetically pleasing. And what I mean here is, people look at it and say, that's a really nice looking grass. That's a different species entirely. So if that's what they want, then you would have to select that particular type of species. If there's one where you're really concerned about how much input you're putting into the system, we have grasses that you don't have to mow more than a couple times a year. You don't need to irrigate at all. You don't need to apply fertilizer at all. And so there is a range of those available. So if you're the one that, I don't really care, I just want something in the front that I don't have to take care of much, but I want to be able to walk on it, then there's a species available for that. So you have to know what you're walking into, what that situation is. So know what the capabilities of your site are, what are you going to use it for, and then how is it going to be managed? Some people like to do this. It's their form of recreation, so they're not afraid of managing it. So I'm going to leave you with 2 practices that are very central to reducing inputs into turf grasses. Number 1 is mowing height. If you will mow your lawn, this is somebody that wants a lawn, at the highest the mower will go, you will dramatically reduce the need for pesticides. Because most homeowners, all they really care about is weeds. That's their biggest concern. And we've done multiple studies that show if you can mow turf at about 4 inches and it maintains its full cover, you won't have any weeds. And so that's a positive thing, if that's what people want. I mean, what I'm seeing with the younger generation, what I'm seeing even amongst myself, is that, it's more about biological diversity. And I don't mind having a lot of different things in there, but some people are still kind of what we call, set in their ways. They're still living in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and what their aesthetic is. So in that case, if that's what they want, the easiest way to get there is to have the mowing height as high as you can go. You're not going to have a weed problem in that particular instance. And the reason why is because you have deeper roots, so there's less need to irrigate. You get more efficient uptake of nutrients, and that makes for a resilient and healthy turfgrass plant. So if it's healthy, you have full cover, then you're not going to have a weed problem. Weeds only come in when you start to have open spots develop. So one thing I would suggest is you mow high. The other is don't export your natural fertilizer away. And so, people that collect clippings, this is what drives me absolutely nuts. People that collect clippings and then let them go off to it's not the landfill anymore. It's now to the yard trimmings facility where it's made into compost. That's good. That's good. Because I just told you compost is good. But the main thing is for your own lawn, it's better just to leave it there. If you can just return the clippings using a mulching mower, you're going to reduce the need for fertilizers by at least half. Well, let's say just around half. Okay, they say a third to a half. So those are the big practices. If the soil has issues, then correct those actions. Pick the right turfgrass variety and species, and we have that information in something called TT77. Which is a publication that we have put out, and then make sure they mow high and that they don't return their clippings. So I went faster this time.
Yeah, good. I just dropped the T77 in the chat for you folks, and it's also on the session 8 session materials on the website. I believe, Dr. Carroll, we've gotten one question so far. That's from Chris. Chris, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Just curious, you showed the 2 slides earlier about the compacted soil from, let's say, where a builder site is next to what you would call a natural site.
Yeah.
How long would it take naturally without a lot of, without a lot of amendments to the soil for that to break down to a natural state?
So there have been some studies that have looked at what it's driven by is organic matter. So plant material decomposes over time. In grassland systems, in like golf course fairways, which are somewhat analogous to lawns, they found that if it's not too compacted, that it basically reaches its capacity to absorb organic matter, to sequester carbon, in about 30 years. So it takes about 30 years' time. Now, those are sites that don't have these severe compaction problems. So I'm not aware of studies, but that would be the starting point, because this is going to take at least 30 years to get to the point where you have a really high organic matter content. And then good things start to happen. Once you introduce organic matter, you get all kinds of good things happening to the soil. And that's why grassland soils are so productive in terms of their biological activity.
Great question, Chris. We had a couple questions put in prior to the session, and I think I've closed out of it. Great. Oh, wait, here we go. What is weed and feed? How does it work? And why is it really not a good idea for turf lawns?
Okay, so there's weed and feed that can be used a couple different ways. There's broadleaf weed and feed, and then there's crabgrass weed and feed. And crabgrass weed and feed is, if it's an issue where you are, I don't consider it necessarily a bad thing because it's a one-off application. But if you use a weed and feed product to control broadleaf weeds, things like dandelions or clover, things that, most of us in this room, I can talk to this audience, those are actually good guys, That's what we want to see in the lawn. But we've got a long way to go with that. The problem with those is they're blanket applications. When you go and put a broadcast spreader down and you spread it all over, there's no need to do that in most lawns. You can usually just spot treat in different locations. So unless you got a really, really bad situation, just blindly applying a weed and feed to control broadleaf weeds, just putting down too much material. You're putting down way more pesticide than you need to be putting down, if that's what your goal is to get rid of those broadleaf weeds.
Well, thank you, Dr. Carroll. It looks like we're about to switch to another room. We'll see you guys soon.